So I think we can all agree that indie animation is big, like really big. Over the last couple years, we've seen independent projects like Helluva Boss, The Amazing Digital Circus, and Lackadaisy not only go on to gain massive traction in the animation industry, but also go on to become some of the most popular things in it. Indie animation has become a whole movement where we're seeing new creative projects being released almost every day. And we've hit a point where you don't need a big network anymore to pitch a show, rather artists with a loyal fan base can do it themselves. And while indie animation has knocked down a ton of doors and possibilities for what you can do in the animation industry, recently this was taken to another level. About 2 weeks ago, LS Mark, a YouTuber who reviews a lot of animated content, dropped a pilot for his own cartoon. Now we've seen artists drop pilots for shows all the time, but I think this is the first time that we've actually seen a YouTuber who reviews other shows drop a pilot for a show. So I thought it'd be fun to review the pilot for Mark's show Catching Up, to see what I like about it, to see what I don't, and to ultimately see, is this going to spark a wave of cartoon YouTubers trying to create their own shows? So before we get into the good and the bad, let's go over the basic premise of the pilot. So the pilot revolves around two characters named Clay and Rob. Clay is a socially awkward, introverted cat, and Rob is an equally socially awkward yet extroverted mouse. The pilot follows the two as they go to a high school clubbing event, but throughout the entire night it's a complete disaster, with nothing going the way they expected. Rob had fantasies about him and Clay looking cool at the club with girls on both of their arms, but because he's young, naive, and a bit of a pushover, he ends up getting led on by two girls all night, with them literally using him as a co-rack, which is just insane. And Clay, who like I said before is extremely socially awkward, has an equally terrible night as he strikes out with girls, is uncomfortable with the large crowd of people being there, and he only really starts to enjoy himself when a student offers him alcohol that he snuck in and Clay gets drunk. And if we're being real, I wouldn't say drowning your sorrows in alcohol is actually enjoying yourself. The pilot ends with Rob standing up for himself to the girls whose coats he had been holding the entire night, and him and Clay both throw their coats in a puddle of water. Rob then apologizes to Clay for making him come out to the club because he knew the night sucked, but Clay tells him even though the night sucked, he kinda warmed up to it. And that's pretty much the pilot. Now let's start off with the good, because I do think there was a lot of good in this pilot. Probably the first and most obvious thing is I genuinely enjoy the art style of this pilot. I don't know why, but it really reminds me of iconic Western cartoons like Tom and Jerry, The Fairly Odd Parents, and Family Guy. And I kind of just enjoy the simplistic look. Like, there are a lot of indie animated projects out there, but when people start talking about the most popular ones, I feel like the ones at the top are really flashy looking. Or even if we look at some of the top projects in the industry, I feel like a lot of them are really flashy, like Blue Eye Samurai or any of the Spider-Verse movies. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing with that. I love all art styles across the board. But I do like the idea that in 2024 and beyond, with this whole do-it-yourself indie animation movement, you don't need the most flashy, eye-catching art style. Rather, you can still be successful with a simple, good-looking style. I also think the voice acting was really good. It never felt amateur at any point to me, but I can't really be too surprised when one of the main characters is voiced by Michael Kovac. Like, he's literally the cheat code for every indie animated pilot. This dude voices everything. And when I tell you the way I laughed so hard when I realized Zach Hadel was the voice of the security guard, bro, I don't know what type of clout LS Mark has, but whatever he's got, I gotta get like him, because I was like, how did he get him in this pilot? But on top of things like that, when it comes to the actual pilot, I do enjoy how it was able to convey the expectations of teens when it comes to things like clubbing, but also the disappointment that comes with it as well. Now, I'm naturally more of an introverted person, but hell, I feel like almost every YouTuber that makes video essays is, but I really did see my teenage self in Clay. There have been times where I've been forced to go somewhere or have went out and I've just completely hated it from the time I got there, which like Clay ultimately led to me just walking around trying to find a corner to sit down and hide in. But I can say I never did try to drown my social awkwardness away with alcohol. And on the other hand, there have been times when I was a teenager where I was more like Rob. I was confident and extroverted, but I was naive and wasn't really able to pick up on social cues. I had plans in my head on how things would go before I even got there, and when I actually got to an event, things would be completely different. And I didn't have to learn how to not be a pushover like Rob, but similar to Clay, I did have friends who were pushovers at that age. And like Rob, they got used by people who weren't really friends with them, and they had to learn to stand up for themselves. So the pilot gave some really good representation on things that teenagers go through on a day-to-day basis, especially when it comes to stupid things like the club, which, might I add, is one of the biggest scams in the world.
So you're telling me I have to pay to get a ride over here, pay to get into this sweaty dump, which will be a bingo all tomorrow, and I'm expected to lug these two jackets, which aren't even mine, by the way, around all night without paying another $30?
Now let's go over a couple critiques I had for this pilot. So one of the first things I felt after watching this pilot was that it ran way longer than it actually should have. Like, I was able to summarize the basic plot of the pilot in about a minute and 30 seconds. And that's really because in this 20-minute pilot, a lot of it is really just fluff. Like, Clay arguing with his mom about how he doesn't want to go to the club is a good detail to show how introverted Clay is, but it doesn't really need to stretch out for as long as it did. And Rob's dad staring down Clay after he drops the two off is cool and all, but him not liking Clay doesn't really have much relevance to the story, at least in the pilot. And there were just a lot of scenes where we were being shown the environment or characters were just looking at each other that really were just stretched out that didn't really need to be there. It kind of just made the pilot feel longer than what it actually was. And while I'm speaking on that, I know I said I liked the voice acting in the pilot, but the actual delivery of the lines kind of felt off at times. There would be times where the characters were talking to each other, but there would be these pauses in between lines, and it made the pilot feel extremely slow, especially in the beginning of it. There was also times where the dialogue just kind of felt weird. I don't really know what demographic Catching Up is aiming for, because after watching the pilot twice, I would imagine the demographic would be a younger one due to the topics it covers in the pilot. But then you get scenes like this.
See what I mean?
Don't be jealous just because I got 2 bitches.
And I'm not gonna lie, the first time I heard this, I laughed so hard, but it wasn't necessarily because it was funny. It was more because I was kind of shocked, because up until that point in the pilot, I thought this was a kid show. And look, man, teenagers curse. I am not oblivious to that. I completely understand. So a teenager cursing in this show isn't necessarily the problem. It's just more the fact that, like, when he does it in the show, it's so awkward. And that's kind of like every time they curse in this show. It's just really awkward every time the lines are delivered. Something about it just feels really out of place. It feels like the characters are cursing just to curse rather than them cursing because they curse, if that makes sense. I feel like if Catching Up wants to do this, the show should take more of a regular show route where everybody who watched a regular show knows that the show is basically borderline cursing almost every episode. The characters were really towing the line, but they never actually crossed the line. And I feel like that would be a great way for Catching Up to let you know that, hey, this isn't a show for kids, while at the same time not coming off as just edgy. Another thing I noticed after my second watch through of the pilot is that the story's kind of weak. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not terrible by any means, but from the way the pilot's set up, it seems like Catching Up's going to be one of those shows where it gives you some type of lesson every episode. And from the way it's executed in the pilot, I feel like with a couple changes, it could have been done better. Like at the beginning of the pilot, Clay doesn't want to go to the club, and Rob and his mom are telling him that he needs to go out and socialize. And by the end of the pilot, Clay tells Rob that even though the night was terrible, he started to enjoy it towards the end, even though he literally doesn't do anything outside of getting drunk and helping Rob throw the girls' jackets into the puddle. And then at the beginning of the pilot, Rob's the one telling Clay that not going out and not socializing is no way to live. But then his plot for the pilot quickly moves to it being about him being a pushover. And I just feel like this concept would have worked so much better if it focused on the two characters learning the good and bad of socializing in the club. Clay being the one to not want to go out and socialize at all, it would have been good for him to see the negative, but also the positives of going out and socializing. And then Rob could have still been a pushover in the pilot, but I think the lesson he learned at the end of the episode should have been more about how going out isn't as great as he imagined it would be, and how he shouldn't just try to push it on people. But even with that being said, I don't think this was a bad pilot by any means. I've seen video essays of people trying to say that the pilot's just mediocre, but honestly, that's really subjective. I see a lot of potential for topics that this show could cover, and it seems like LS Mark wants to do an episodic format, which honestly would be perfect for a series like this. I know he's doing a Kickstarter for episode 2, and I will be donating to the cause because I am interested to see what he can do with this series. But if you haven't seen the pilot for Catching Up, I'm gonna link it in the description and you should definitely go check it out. I would say it's definitely one of the better indie animated pilots out there, but I could be biased because I just love everything indie animated. But if you made it to the end of the video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be notified when I upload my next video. Check out my socials in the description if you want to keep up with me. And until then, it's been your boy CornXV, and I'm off this. Pull up in Rovers, it's over. Bitch, I'm Chief Sosa, this cold llama, it can't want no